Hey friends, welcome back. It is another episode of Seed Talk with Lisa and Layne. Hey Layne.
Hello, Lisa. Hey, everybody.
Well, it is just such a great time of the year, isn't it, to kind of be inside and still be kind of diving into gardening and farming, right? Talking about stuff. So, doing podcasts and creating content is always high on our list this time of the year. And, friends, what makes that all possible is thegardenersworkshop.com. And we invite you to visit our website that's kind of home base to everything that we do over there. We have a fully stocked online garden shop, a library full of online courses. So, Layne, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today I thought we would do a little bit of a February farm check-in. So we're recording this episode about a week before it's going to be released, and I thought we would just see what's going on the farm. Is anything blooming outside yet? What's going on in the grow room? What are you planting? Just some different things like that. And then I also am going to ask you for a tip of the month, and we'll answer just a few miscellaneous questions from listeners.
Awesome. That sounds like fun. Let's
Yeah.
let's hit it.
All right, Lisa. So let's just start off by asking what is going on at the farm this month? And before you answer that, I also just want to mention that Lisa's flower farm is located in southeastern Virginia in USDA zone 8A, and her last expected frost date based on historical averages is around April 15th. So what's going on, Lisa?
Sure. And the other thing that I think is really surprising to people, Layne, is that we have no hoop and greenhouses here. Everything we grow is outdoors in the garden once it leaves our little grow room. So, what is going on here? Well, kind of something that we haven't talked about very much. My hellebores are
Oh,
blooming. They aren't very tall yet. We've kind of had a dry last summer and fall and winter, which water really fuels stem length. So I just noticed this morning when I was walking Tucker that the Linton Rose garden, which is right outside my family room, is loaded with like 4-inch tall stems with buds on them. And some of them are starting to
oh,
crack and they'll elongate once they get growing a little bit more. So that's always very exciting here because, you know, they were a huge contributor to our cash crop. We sold them to florists. I mean, they just could never get enough of them. But when we started a really big bouquet program, they became a key filler flower for our first bouquets in April and May. So the hellebores are starting. That's really, really exciting.
you're always just a smidgen ahead of us here. Our hellebores are budding up, but they're not quite blooming yet. But I also just wanted to mention that back in episode 77, we did an entire episode on growing hellebores as cut flowers. So be sure to check that out. Okay, keep going, Lisa.
So the other thing, and I was going to show you, this is not a cut flower, but I am always so thrilled in February when this happens. Let me grab them. We have some heirloom daffodils called February Gold, and they aren't very big and they aren't very spectacular, but they are pretty amazing when they bloom in February. Steve's grandma actually planted these, so they're here on our home place. And this particular patch is out along the street, and so I grabbed these. We were getting ready to have rain over the weekend, thank goodness, and I grabbed these up because I knew the blooms were going to get pulverized. So that's kind of what's blooming. And in my grow room, let's see, in the grow room, all of our very early spring plantings of cool flowers are coming right along. So this week, this is like Valentine's week, so we're in mid February. So we normally start planting our cool flowers very early spring between February 14th and March 1st, and we're right on schedule to do that. This week, they're calling for us to have more ice, snow, sleet, and rain this week, which is really pretty perfect because, as I've mentioned, we've just really had a dry last 6 months. And it really reflects in how much my transplants that are the fall planted stuff. And so the grow room is full of stock and straw flowers and sweet William and didiscus and all of these very early spring plantings. Some, like stock and straw flowers, is the only planting. We didn't do fall. It's the first planting of them. And then we have some like Sweet William, the Amazon series, that it's our second succession because we have some planted out in the field already. So it's just really fun, but it's kind of on the edge. I would actually be moving them outdoors this week, but with all this yucky blowing weather coming, I'm just leaving them in the grow room. And so
Yeah.
we'll just wait to get them in the ground next week. February for me is a real gathering of, okay, I'm kind of done with cool flowers as far as seed starting and all of that, and we're getting ready to plant. Now what's next? Okay, warm, and I need to be sure I have what I need to do those warms, whether that is soil, the seeds, how much room do I really have before I always have a dream list, don't we all?
Oh, yeah.
And then I do a reality check. How much space do we really have to plant for warm season for the first succession? So that's kind of what's going on here.
And that leads right into the tip of the month that you wanted to share, Lisa, which was about warm season seeds and the timing of when to start those.
Yeah, and it's so easy to start too early. First off, I'm hoping that by folks really being introduced to cool season hardy annuals, aka cool flowers, that they've had something to really occupy and fill that hunger to start seeds in, in the early season, way too early to be starting warm stuff. But people do it. It's amazing the number of people that have already reached out and they've already got tomatoes going and they live where I am. It's like, do you realize you can't even plant them for 2 more months? Nobody is going to be happy sitting inside under a grow light for 2.5 months, right? So, warm season tender annuals, my tip is do not start too soon. Really look at how long before you want to plant. First off, when are you going to plant? When are you supposed to plant warm season annuals? What's your earliest plant date? And then look at your individual plants, whether it's vegetables or flowers or herbs. How many weeks in advance of that date should you start your seed? And get it on the calendar. I think you might be surprised. We don't starting warm season, typical, most of them, like at the end of the first week of March. And that's the stuff that's kind of slow growing, that we want a little bit bigger. And then we just go from there. And then once we start those seeds, the party really gets started, but you don't want to start too early and have beautiful transplants when they're like 4 weeks old. But oh gosh, now you look at your calendar and you really can't plant them outside for 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks on a transplant beyond what it needs, there's nothing you can do to keep them looking great and keep them healthy indoors. So
Yeah.
don't do it. And I mean, we get a lot of questions about what's wrong with my transplants. And they're getting spots. The leaves on the bottom are turning brown. They're getting stretched out and tall. They're getting yellow. And all of those can be symptoms of other things. But most often, the first question I ask is, how old are they? And when they
Yeah.
say 9 weeks, I say, well, there you go. They should have been planted 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago. So yeah, timing is everything.
Okay, now we're going to move on to a few miscellaneous listener questions that we've gotten over the past month or so. So, the first one is actually relating to episode 122, which was our first episode of the year, which was about the Pantone Color of the Year Mocha Mousse, and our featured flower, which was Ping Pong Scabiosa. So, the question is, I've tried drying ping pong, and even when I harvest at very early stages of the pod development, the little stars in the seed head always seem to continue to develop and fall out. Any tips?
No, other than harvest even earlier than you think you are. Because I'm just thinking I'm not in the work building, so I can't look at our bunches. But I don't know that we experience that. And if that happened one time, what I mean, if it happened in one season, I would just try again this coming year and harvest them even earlier than you think. Because I do agree that it is really easy to leave plants out, especially plants you're trying to grow pods on. People struggle with the poppy pod also for green, for fresh use, they almost always leave it too late. And what I just learned after being asked that question so much is that I harvest it even earlier than what people think is early. So I would say I would just cut it even earlier and try it again. The pod does not need to be so big. It's obvious that if you cut it at a certain stage and it continues to develop, there's nothing you can do probably to stop that. So you just have to cut it earlier.
All right, moving on to the next one. I'm confused about fertilizer. Should I be actively fertilizing my plants that are overwintering? They're looking yellow.
So if we're talking about cool flowers, fall planted, just to backtrack just slightly, when we prepare beds, no matter the season, fall, winter, very early spring, spring, and summer, all those beds get our general purpose dry organic fertilizer applied at the recommended rate of the directions on the fertilizer. So that's just a real putting back into the soil what we're squeezing out of it by planting over and over again, right? So assuming that that is done, and we even skip that from time to time because we have such fertile soil because of how long and well we feed our soil, not just in fertilizer and other products, right? So assuming that you're doing that, if you're talking about a fall planting, they can look a little yellow. They're outside in the freezing cold. That can be a natural happening. Other things that can cause yellowing is poor drainage. They're starting to, their
Yeah.
feet, even though you don't see standing water, if you really closely monitor your soil in one of your beds all throughout winter, you'll be surprised how wet it stays versus what it does in the summertime. So that can actually cause that. There really is no benefit to fertilize during the winter months because there's, if you read the direction on synthetic products, I think it even says don't fertilize under 70 degrees or something like that. But especially with organics, they're relying on the microbiology of the soil. And when it is cold outside, those guys are hibernating. They've gone dormant basically. So there's really no way to address that. I tell people, when do you fertilize again? It would be beneficial that when very early spring arrives and you're starting to have some warm afternoons and you start seeing those fall planted plants start to have little sprouts and they're starting to come out of dormancy and grow, that'd be a great time to give them a liquid feed, follow according to directions, and that may combat that, or nature may just fix that for you.
And we do have an entire episode about fertilizer for seedlings and for things growing out in the garden. And that was episode 34. So be sure to check that out if you want to hear even more about fertilizer. All right, our last question is going to be, when should I thin the cool flowers that I sowed directly outdoors in the fall?
This is a really great question because especially if you have, which we have some years, a mildish winter where you're out there looking in your garden more often than you do when it's like deep freeze, snow on the ground kind of winter. So I just want to say resist. That's one of the first jobs that we do in very early spring, which as I mentioned for us is like mid-February to the 1st of March. And while we can do it before, during, or after that planting window, what you do want to, the timing for me is essential to get to them before they really start doing a lot of growing, because like these bells that you're looking at, that is bells of Ireland, that has not been thinned, and those plants need a little bit of room. They need 4 to 6 inches around each plant. And as you can see, I really oversow some crops that can be more difficult because of they just need certain conditions. I find it's just more beneficial for me to oversow and then thin so that we have a plant every 4 to 6 inches in that row. So because it's, if you have a 10-inch wind opening in your bed, it may not seem like much to you, but it is. Not only did you miss a plant, but that's a window for weeds to grow throughout the season. So My goal is to thin in very early spring and to get to that job before they start actively growing so they don't start to elongate because they're having to elbow their neighbor out of the way. I did that one year. The bells are so blooming beautiful when they're 6 inches tall and crowded. You think, oh my gosh, I cannot pull them out. Let me just speak to you from experience. Pull them out and leave one healthy plant every 4 to 6 inches because it will not go well
Yeah.
when they're trying to be 24 to 36 inches tall. And so, yeah, very early spring is the window, and that allows them to get through the questionable time, right? Whether it's wet feet during the winter from being so cold, or voles, or what have you. So we like to wait till then.
Perfect. And we also have an episode all about thinning your direct seeded and self-sown beds of seedlings, and that's episode 27. So again, be sure to check that out if you want to hear an even longer discussion about that. All right, well, that does it for this episode that was about a February farm check-in. Let us know if you liked this little check-in style of an episode. And if you have any questions that you'd like to be included in a future episode of Seed Talk, please be sure to leave them in the comment section over on YouTube or submit them using the form linked in the show notes. And just thanks again for being here, everyone, and be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening.
And so, friends, that's a wrap. And remember, we'd love to have you visit over at thegardenersworkshop.com, where you will find Layne and I, as that's our home base. All right, friends, till we meet again. Ciao.
Bye.